In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where 1,000 civilizations rise and fall like waves upon cosmic shores, there exists a truth that echoes through the void. Some species are born to conquer, others to serve, and a rare few to inspire. But what happens when the youngest, most fragile race in known space becomes the beacon that lights the way for all others? When humanity first stumbled into the galactic community, bleeding and broken from their own wars, no one expected them to survive their first decade among the stars. They were weak, divided, and possessed technology that seemed primitive compared to empires spanning millennia. The Zephyrian Council dismissed them as another failed experiment in evolution. The mighty Korathian Empire saw them as potential slaves. The ancient ethereal collective viewed them as amusing insects. They were all wrong. This is the story of how a species that couldn't even unite their own world became the rallying cry for justice across the galaxy. How humans, in their stubborn refusal to abandon those who stood beside them, transformed from galactic outcasts into the most feared and revered allies any civilization could hope to have. Because when humanity gives their word, when they stand with you in the darkness, something extraordinary happens. Enemies become brothers. The impossible becomes inevitable. And the galaxy itself bends toward justice. Welcome to the legend that began with a simple promise: we stand with you. What follows is the true account of how humanity earned not just respect, but something far more valuable: the unwavering loyalty of beings across the stars, and how that loyalty would reshape the very fabric of galactic civilization. The emergency beacon cut through the darkness of space like a desperate cry for help. Ambassador Elena Vasquez felt the vibration through the hull of the human diplomatic vessel New Geneva as they dropped out of hyperspace near the Kepler 442 system. What they found waiting for them defied every protocol in the Galactic Accord. The Vorthan colony ships hung in space like broken birds, their elegant bioluminescent hulls flickering with dying light. Emergency pods drifted between the larger vessels, carrying refugees whose only crime had been trusting in the protection of galactic law. Eleanor watched the tactical display with growing horror as Korathian dreadnoughts moved through the scattered fleet like predators among sheep. "Captain Rodriguez, are you seeing this?" Elena's voice carried the weight of disbelief that had settled over the bridge. Captain Maria Rodriguez nodded grimly, her weathered face reflecting the blue glow of the tactical screens. 47 Vorthan vessels, maybe 60,000 souls aboard. The Korathians have them surrounded. According to galactic law, we have no jurisdiction here. Elena studied the scene unfolding before them. The Vorthans were a peaceful species, known throughout the galaxy for their artistic achievements and philosophical contributions to galactic culture. Their bioluminescent cities on distant worlds were considered wonders of the galaxy, and their poetry had touched the hearts of dozens of species. They were also physically fragile, with delicate bone structures that made them poor fighters and easy targets. "What's the legal situation?" Eleanor asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Lieutenant Commander Chen looked up from his console, his expression grim. The Korathian Empire filed territorial expansion claims 3 days ago. Technically, this system falls under their sphere of influence now. The Galactic Council hasn't had time to review the claim, but until they do, the Vorthans are sitting ducks, Rodriguez finished. "And we're legally obligated to maintain neutrality." Elena watched as another Vorthan vessel shuddered under Korathian weapons fire. The elegant ship's bioluminescent patterns dimmed and died. Another light extinguished in the darkness. She could almost hear the screams across the void, could imagine the terror of families huddled together as death approached from the stars. The communication system crackled to life with an incoming transmission from the lead Korathian dreadnought. The image that appeared on screen was imposing. Admiral Thrakus, his scaled features twisted into what passed for a smile among his species. His yellow eyes gleamed with predatory satisfaction. "Human vessel," Thrakus began, his translator rendering his words in clipped mechanical tones. "You have entered Korathian space. State your business or depart immediately." Elena stepped forward, drawing herself up to her full height. At 5 feet 6, she was tiny compared to most galactic species, but her presence filled the bridge. "Admiral, I am Ambassador Elena Vasquez of the Terran Federation. We received a distress signal from civilian vessels in this system." Thrakus's laugh was a harsh, grating sound. "These are not civilian vessels, Ambassador. These are illegal immigrants attempting to establish unauthorized colonies in Korathian territory. We are merely enforcing galactic law. By firing on unarmed ships, Elena's voice carried an edge that made several bridge crew members look up from their stations. They refused to surrender when ordered, Thrakus replied smoothly. Their resistance constitutes an act of war against the Korathian Empire. Surely even humans understand the right of sovereign powers to defend their territory. Elena felt anger building in her chest, the familiar fire that had driven her through decades of diplomatic service. She had seen this before. Powerful species using legal technicalities to justify brutality against the weak. The Korathians were masters of this particular game, always operating just within the bounds of galactic law, while committing atrocities that would have been war crimes in any reasonable civilization. Admiral, she said carefully, I'm sure we can resolve this situation without further bloodshed. Perhaps if we could arrange for the peaceful relocation of the Vorthan settlers, the matter is not open for negotiation. Thrakus cut her off. These criminals will surrender immediately or face the consequences. You have no authority here, human. I suggest you depart before you find yourself in violation of galactic law as well. The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Elena stared at the tactical display, watching as more Vorthan ships took damage from Korathian weapons. The refugee vessels were trying to form a protective formation around their most vulnerable ships, transports carrying young and elderly, but their civilian vessels were no match for military dreadnoughts. Ma'am, Lieutenant Commander Chen spoke up hesitantly. Technically, the Admiral is correct. We have no legal authority to intervene in what the Korathians are classifying as a law enforcement action. Elena turned to face him, her dark eyes reflecting the determination that had been forged in humanity's bloodiest conflicts. Tell me, Commander, what does your conscience say about watching 60,000 innocent beings get slaughtered while we hide behind legal technicalities?
Chen looked uncomfortable.
My conscience says we should help them, but my duty to regulations. Sometimes, Elena said quietly. Conscience and duty point in the same direction, and sometimes they don't. She turned to Captain Rodriguez. Maria, what's our tactical situation? Rodriguez consulted her displays. We've got a heavy cruiser configuration, decent shields, some bite to our weapons, but nothing like those Korathian dreadnoughts. In a straight fight, we'd last maybe 20 minutes. What about the Vorthan vessels? Any defensive capabilities? Minimal, Rodriguez replied. Some point defense systems, but they're designed more for asteroid deflection than combat. Their hulls are beautiful but fragile. The Korathians could crack them open like eggs. Elena nodded slowly, her mind racing through possibilities. The smart move, the safe move, would be to file a formal protest with the Galactic Council and retreat to human space. By the time the bureaucrats finished their deliberations, the Vorthans would be dead or enslaved, but humanity would have clean hands and clear consciences, according to galactic law. But Elena had not spent 30 years in diplomatic service to watch genocide unfold while hiding behind legal niceties. Open a channel to the Vorthan fleet, she ordered. The screen flickered to life, revealing the delicate features of a Vorthan female. Her bioluminescent patches pulsed in patterns that Elena's cultural database identified as extreme distress. Behind her, other Vorthans moved frantically, their graceful forms bent over control panels and communication arrays.
This is Fleet Singer Lyrelay of the Vorthan Exodus Fleet, the alien said, her melodious voice carrying harmonics that spoke of deep emotion.
Human vessel, please, we do not ask you to fight for us. We know you cannot violate galactic law for strangers. But perhaps you could carry word of our fate to those who remember us with kindness. Elena felt something break inside her chest. The Vorthan wasn't asking for help. She was asking for someone to remember them when they were gone. In that moment, Elena saw not just an alien face, but the face of every refugee, every victim of genocide throughout human history. She saw the children on the transport vessels, saw families holding each other close as death approached from the stars. Fleet Singer Lyreley, Elena said, her voice carrying across the void between ships. I am Ambassador Elena Vasquez, and I want you to know something important. You are not alone out here. Lyreley's bioluminescent patches shifted to patterns Elena didn't recognize, but the emotion in her voice was universal. Ambassador, we thank you for your words, but we understand you can't what? Elena interrupted gently. Can't stand by and watch innocent people die? Can't honor the principles that supposedly govern civilized space? Can't remember that laws exist to protect people, not the other way around? But the legal restrictions... Fleet Singer, Elena said, stepping closer to the screen. Let me tell you something about humans. We have a saying, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. We've learned that lesson the hard way, over and over again throughout our history. She turned to Captain Rodriguez. Maria, transmit our position and current situation to Terran Command. Make sure they understand we're acting under humanitarian protocols. Elena, Rodriguez said quietly, if we do this, there's no going back. The diplomatic fallout alone will be worth it, Elena finished. Every life saved will be worth it. She turned back to the screen. Fleet Singer, I'm going to need you to do something for me. I need your ships to form up in a defensive sphere, with your most vulnerable vessels in the center. Put your fastest ships on the outside. Anything that can run should be ready to run. Ambassador, we cannot ask you to sacrifice yourself for... You're not asking, Elena said firmly. We're offering. There's a difference. The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. The Vorthan ships, guided by human tactical advice transmitted on encrypted channels, began forming a defensive formation that would give them the best chance of protecting their most vulnerable members. The New Geneva moved into position at the edge of Vorthan space, placing herself between the refugee fleet and the approaching Carathian dreadnoughts. Admiral Thrakus was not pleased with this development. His image reappeared on the main screen, his scaled features twisted with rage. Human vessel, you will withdraw immediately. Your interference in Carathian law enforcement operations constitutes an act of war. Elena looked into the camera with steady eyes. Admiral, we're not interfering with your law enforcement. We're conducting a humanitarian inspection of refugee vessels to ensure compliance with galactic welfare standards. Purely routine. Those vessels are in Carathian space. According to territorial claims that haven't been ratified by the Galactic Council yet, Elena replied smoothly, until the legal status of this system is determined, we have as much right to be here as you do. It was a flimsy legal argument, and everyone on the bridge knew it. But it would buy them time, and time was what the Vorthans needed most. You are walking a very dangerous path, human, Thrakus growled. The Carathian Empire does not forget insults. Neither do humans, Elena replied quietly. We remember every act of courage, every moment when someone chose to do right instead of what was easy. And we remember every time we stood by and let evil happen because it was legal. The transmission cut off, and Elena could see the Carathian fleet adjusting their formation. They were positioning to attack the Vorthans while avoiding direct confrontation with the human vessel, at least for now. Ma'am, Commander Chen reported, I'm detecting weapons charging on the Carathian dreadnoughts. They're preparing to resume their attack. Elena nodded. She had known this moment would come. All hands prepare for combat. This is not a drill. Throughout the ship, alarms began to sound. Crew members who had signed up for diplomatic missions found themselves preparing for battle against impossible odds. But as Elena looked around the bridge, she saw no fear in their faces, only determination. Captain, she said to Rodriguez, take us in. The New Geneva moved forward, placing herself directly between the Carathian fleet and the most vulnerable Vorthan transports. She was a single ship against 5 dreadnoughts, a gesture that was as futile as it was brave. But sometimes, Elena knew, gestures mattered more than outcomes. This is Ambassador Elena Vasquez of the Terran Federation, she said, broadcasting on all frequencies. To any vessel receiving this transmission, we stand with the Vorthan people today. We stand against the strong who prey upon the weak, against the powerful who hide behind unjust laws, against those who would turn the vast wonder of the galaxy into a hunting ground for the defenseless. She paused, looking out at the stars that surrounded them. We may be one ship against many. We may not survive the next hour. But we will not be moved. We will not abandon those who have placed their trust in the idea that somewhere in this galaxy, someone still believes in justice. The first Carathian weapons fired, brilliant beams of energy that lit up the darkness like artificial lightning. The New Geneva shuddered under the impact, but her shields held. For now, return fire, Rodriguez ordered, and humanity's answer blazed across the void. The battle for the Vorthan refugees had begun. But more than that, something else had begun. Something that would echo through the galaxy for generations to come. A single human ship, outgunned and outnumbered, had drawn a line in the darkness and declared that some things were worth fighting for. As the New Geneva traded fire with the Carathian dreadnoughts, as her crew fought with desperate courage against impossible odds, the rest of the galaxy watched and wondered. What kind of species willingly faced annihilation for strangers? What drove these humans to choose conscience over law, justice over survival? They would soon find out that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their tactics, but their stubborn, unbreakable refusal to let evil triumph through the inaction of the good. And in refugee camps and hidden colonies across the galaxy, beings who had lived in fear began to whisper a new hope. The humans are coming. The humans stand with us. The legend was born in fire and starlight, written in the hull metal of a diplomatic vessel that chose to fight rather than flee. And though the battle was just beginning, the outcome was already certain in ways that transcended military victory or defeat. Humanity had chosen its side, and that choice would change everything. The New Geneva shook violently as another salvo of Carathian plasma bolts slammed into her starboard shields. Captain Rodriguez gripped her command chair as sparks flew from overloaded systems across the bridge. They had been holding the line for 27 minutes, far longer than anyone had expected, but not nearly long enough. Shield strength down to 38%, reported Lieutenant Commander Chen, his voice strained but steady. Forward arrays are showing critical stress fractures. Elena watched the tactical display with growing desperation. The human ship had managed to position herself in a way that forced the Carathians to engage her directly before they could reach the most vulnerable Vorthan transports, but it was a delaying tactic at best. The New Geneva was dying by degrees, each enemy salvo bringing them closer to total system failure. "Any word from the Vorthans on evacuation progress?" Elena asked. Fleet Singer Lyra Lee reports they've managed to redistribute non-essential personnel to their fastest vessels. Chen replied, but they're refusing to abandon their cultural archives and the elderly who can't survive rapid acceleration.
Elena closed her eyes for a moment.
The Vorthans were trying to save everyone, which meant they would save no one. It was a cultural trait that she admired, and that would get them all killed. "Ma'am," Rodriguez called out, "sensor sweep is detecting new hyperspace signatures. Multiple contacts dropping out of FTL." Eleanor's heart sank. If Admiral Thrakus had called for reinforcements, the battle would be over in minutes. But as the new contacts resolved on the tactical display, she felt a surge of confusion followed by desperate hope. The ships emerging from hyperspace weren't Carathian. They weren't human either. "I'm reading 12 vessels," Chen reported, his voice filled with amazement. "Configuration matches Zelrani heavy cruisers. They're broadcasting diplomatic immunity codes." The Zelrani were an ancient species, older even than the Carathians, with a reputation for neutrality that bordered on complete isolationism. They had been founding members of the Galactic Council, but rarely involved themselves in the affairs of younger species. Elena had met exactly 3 Zelrani in her entire diplomatic career, and each conversation had been brief, formal, and utterly forgettable. The lead Zelrani vessel opened a communication channel. The being that appeared on screen was tall and ethereal, with pale blue skin and elongated features that spoke of evolution on a low-gravity world. Elder Valdris of the Zelrani Diplomatic Corps looked exactly like what central casting would order for an ancient alien sage, wise, distant, and utterly unflappable. "This is Elder Valdris," the Zelrani announced, his translated voice carrying the weight of millennia. "I am here to observe this situation." Admiral Thrakus appeared on a split screen, his scaled features twisted with rage. "Elder Valdris, this is an internal Carathian matter. Your presence here is noted and disregarded," Valdris interrupted smoothly. "The Zelrani Diplomatic Corps has received reports of unusual activities in this sector. We are here to ensure that all parties are operating within established galactic protocols." Elena felt a flicker of hope. The Zelrani were notorious for their bureaucratic obsession with proper procedures. If they started an investigation into the Carathians' territorial claims, it could tie up the situation for months. But Thrakus was not easily deterred. "The situation is clear, Elder. These Vorthan criminals are trespassing in Carathian space. We are enforcing our legitimate territorial rights. Territorial rights that have not yet been ratified by the Galactic Council," Valdris observed. "Most irregular, most concerning." Elena seized the opening. "Elder Valdris, we request formal Zelrani arbitration of this territorial dispute under Article 7 of the Galactic Peace Accords." The request was a long shot. Article 7 allowed for neutral arbitration of territorial disputes, but only when both parties agreed to the process. The Carathians would never. "The Carathian Empire rejects any arbitration," Thrakus snarled. "This is not a dispute, this is law enforcement." But something unexpected happened. Elder Valdris turned his ancient eyes toward the human vessel, and for the first time in the conversation, His expression showed something other than diplomatic neutrality. Captain Rodriguez of the human vessel, Valdris said, "Your actions here today have been illuminating. To place your ship between the strong and the weak, to face certain destruction for the sake of strangers, this is not behavior we have observed from younger species." Elena stepped forward. "Elder, we stand ready to accept Zelrani arbitration if the Korathians will agree to a temporary ceasefire while the Korathian Empire will agree to no such thing," Thrakus roared. "We will complete our law enforcement action immediately." The Admiral's image cut off, and Elena could see the Korathian dreadnoughts charging weapons for what would likely be their final assault. The New Geneva's shields couldn't take another sustained attack. But then something unprecedented happened. All Korathian vessels, Elder Valdris announced on open channels, his voice carrying the authority of ancient law. "You will stand down immediately and withdraw to a distance of no less than 10 planetary diameters from this location." Thrakus reappeared on screen, his rage now mixed with disbelief. "You have no authority to..." The Zelrani Diplomatic Corps invokes emergency arbitration protocols under the founding charter of the Galactic Council. Valdris continued implacably. "All military actions in this sector are suspended, pending proper review of territorial claims and adherence to humanitarian law." "The founding charter hasn't been invoked in over 2,000 years, Thrakus protested. "Precisely why it carries such weight," Valdris replied. "The charter supersedes all subsequent agreements and treaties. You will comply or face the combined response of all founding member species." Elena held her breath. The founding charter was a relic from the early days of galactic civilization, when the galaxy was a far more dangerous place. It gave the original council members extraordinary authority to prevent galactic wars, but it had never been used in living memory. If the Zelrani was serious, Thrakus stared at the Zelrani elder for a long moment, his predatory eyes calculating odds. Finally, he spoke through gritted teeth. "The Korathian Empire will comply with charter protocols under protest. But this is not over, human." The Korathian dreadnoughts began withdrawing, their weapons powering down. Elena felt her knees go weak with relief. They had done it. Somehow, impossibly, they had saved the Vorthan refugees. But Elder Valdris was not finished. "Captain Rodriguez," the Zelrani said, "please prepare to receive a diplomatic party. There are matters we must discuss." 2 hours later, Elena found herself in the New Geneva's main conference room, facing the most unusual diplomatic gathering of her career. Elder Valdris sat across from her, his ancient features unreadable. But he was not alone. Through the conference room's viewports, Elena could see that more ships had arrived. The sleek, organic curves of ethereal vessels hung in space alongside the geometric precision of hegemony cruisers. Even the mysterious architects had sent a representative, a massive ship that looked more grown than built. "Ambassador Vasquez," Elder Valdris began. "What happened here today was unprecedented. In 3,000 years of galactic civilization, we have never observed behavior quite like yours." Elena shifted uncomfortably. "Elder, we simply couldn't stand by and watch." "Precisely," Valdris interrupted. "You could not stand by. This is what makes your species so unique. Every other civilization in the galaxy operates on principles of calculated advantage. Risk versus reward. Cost versus benefit. But humans..." He paused, as if searching for the right words. "Humans operate on principles that confound our understanding." The conference room door chimed, and Fleetsinger Lyrelay entered. The Vorthan moved with the fluid grace of her species, but Elena could see the strain of recent events in the dim flickering of her bioluminescent patches. "Ambassador," Lyrelay said, her musical voice filled with emotion, "I wanted to thank you personally. My people, we will never forget what you did here today." "You don't need to thank us," Elena replied. "We did what anyone should do." "But they did not," Valdris observed quietly. "For 3 hours, 60,000 Vorthan lives hung in the balance. 17 different species detected the emergency beacon. All chose to maintain neutrality rather than risk confrontation with the Korathian Empire." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. 17 species knew what was happening here? Indeed, the hegemony calculated that intervention would damage trade relationships. The consortium determined that the legal risks outweighed potential benefits. Even the ethereal collective, who claimed to value all sentient life, concluded that the Vorthans were acceptable losses in the greater galactic order. "But humans," Lyrelay said, her bioluminescent patterns now cycling through what Elena recognized as expressions of awe, Humans did not calculate. Humans did not weigh costs. Humans saw suffering and acted to stop it. Elder Valdris leaned forward. This brings us to why I am here, Ambassador. The Zelrani have been watching your species since you first achieved faster-than-light travel. We have observed with great interest as you stumbled through your early diplomatic encounters, as you struggled to understand galactic law and custom. We made a lot of mistakes, Elena admitted. Yes, Valdris agreed. But you also did something else, something that we have not seen in millennia of galactic history. You maintained your moral principles even when they conflicted with your practical interests. The elder stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the gathered fleet. Ambassador, I want to tell you something that is not generally known outside the highest levels of galactic government. The galaxy is dying. Elena felt her blood run cold. I don't understand. Not literally dying, Valdris clarified, but dying spiritually, culturally, morally. For 3,000 years, we have built a civilization based on law, order, and rational calculation. We have eliminated most wars, reduced poverty, achieved technological marvels that would seem like magic to your ancestors. He turned back to face her. But in doing so, we have also eliminated something else. We have eliminated the capacity for moral courage. Every decision is made by committee, every action calculated for minimum risk. We have become a galaxy of bureaucrats and accountants. Until today, Lyrilei added softly. Until one human ship looked at an impossible situation and said, no. Elena was beginning to understand where this conversation was leading, and she didn't like it. Elder, if you're asking us to become some kind of galactic police force, what I am offering is something far more significant. Ambassador, the Zelrani Diplomatic Corps would like to sponsor humanity for full council membership with accelerated privileges. Elena's jaw dropped. Full council membership typically took centuries to achieve, with extensive probationary periods and cultural evaluations. The accelerated track was reserved for species that had already proven themselves through millennia of peaceful development.
Elder, she said carefully, humanity has only been in space for 200 years.
We've been part of galactic civilization for less than 50. We're nowhere near ready for full membership. Your technology suggests otherwise, Valdris replied. Your actions today prove otherwise. More importantly, the galaxy needs what humanity represents, which is the willingness to do right when doing right is hard. The courage to stand up to power when power is wrong. The stubborn, irrational, completely illogical determination to protect the weak, simply because they are weak. Fleet singer Lyrilei moved closer to Elena. Ambassador, my people have decided something. We wish to offer the Terran Federation a formal alliance. Not a trade agreement or mutual defense pact, but a full cultural and political alliance. Elena stared at her. Fleet singer, the Vorthans are a council species. You're one of the founding artistic civilizations. For you to ally with humanity would send a message throughout the galaxy, Valdris finished. Other species are watching, Ambassador. Some with hope, others with fear. They want to see what kind of civilization humanity will become as it grows stronger. We're not warriors, Elena protested. We're explorers, scientists, diplomats. You are protectors, Valdris corrected. Today proved that. The question now is whether you will accept the responsibility that comes with that role. Elena looked around the conference room, at the representatives of species that had shaped galactic civilization for millennia. They were all looking at her with expressions she had never seen directed at humanity before. Respect, hope, and something that looked almost like desperation. What exactly are you proposing? She asked. A new alliance, Valdris replied. Species who believe that law should serve justice, not the other way around. Civilizations who remember that power carries responsibility and that the strong have a duty to protect the weak. Starting with the Vorthans and the Zelrani? Elena asked. Starting with the Vorthans and the Zelrani, Valdris confirmed. But not ending there. Ambassador, do you know what is happening throughout the galaxy right now? Elena shook her head. This conversation is being broadcast on diplomatic channels. The footage of your ship standing against 5 Korathian dreadnoughts is spreading through the galactic communication network. And on 100 worlds, in refugee camps and hidden colonies, beings who have lived in fear for generations are saying the same thing. Valdris paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. They are saying the humans stood with the Vorthans. Perhaps they will stand with us too. Elena felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a physical force. She thought of Admiral Thrakis's threat. The Korathian Empire does not forget insults. She thought of the political implications, the military consequences, the thousand ways this could spiral into exactly the kind of galactic conflict that humanity was nowhere near ready to fight. Then she thought of Fleet Singer Lyralay's voice as she prepared her people for death, asking only that someone remember them with kindness. "Elder," Elena said finally, "I don't have the authority to commit humanity to this kind of alliance." "That decision would have to come from the Federation Council." "Of course," Valdris replied. "But you do have the authority to recommend it. And more importantly, you have the moral authority that comes from your actions today." Elena nodded slowly. She knew what her recommendation would be, knew what she would tell the Federation Council when she returned to Earth. Humanity had always struggled with the question of what kind of species they wanted to be. Today, in the darkness between stars, they had found their answer. "Fleet Singer Lyrelay," Elena said, "please convey to your people that the Terran Federation will be honored to consider your alliance proposal. And Elder Valdris," she continued, "please inform the Galactic Council that humanity accepts nomination for full membership with all the responsibilities that entails." The ancient Selrani smiled, the first genuine emotion Elena had seen from him. "Ambassador, I believe this marks the beginning of a new era in galactic civilization." Elena looked out the viewport at the assembled fleet, at ships from species that had fought and bled to build the current galactic order. They were betting their future on a species barely out of its own solar system, on the hope that humanity's irrational compassion could somehow fix what 3,000 years of rational progress had broken. It was a terrifying responsibility. It was also exactly what Elena had spent her entire career preparing for, without ever realizing it. "Elder," she said, "I think you're right. The question is whether the rest of the galaxy is ready for what comes next." As the New Geneva prepared to depart for Earth carrying news that would shake the foundations of human space, Elena allowed herself one moment of satisfaction. They had saved the Vorthans. They had prevented a massacre. But more than that, they had proven something important about humanity's place in the galaxy. When humanity gave their word, when they stood with someone in the darkness, they meant it. And that, Elena knew, was about to change everything. 6 months after the Vorthan crisis, the halls of the Galactic Council chambers on New Byzantium hummed with unprecedented activity. Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked through corridors that had witnessed 3 millennia of galactic politics, her footsteps echoing off walls carved from a single massive crystal that had once been the heart of a star. But today felt different. Today the ancient halls buzzed with an energy that spoke of fundamental change. "Nervous?" asked Captain Rodriguez, who had requested to accompany Elena as her military advisor. The captain's presence was itself a statement. Humanity was no longer sending just diplomats to council sessions. "Terrified," Elena admitted honestly. 6 months ago, we were a minor member species with observer status. Today, we're potentially reshaping galactic civilization. They passed a group of hegemony delegates deep in heated discussion, their metallic voices creating harmonics that hurt human ears. One of them looked up as Elena passed, and she caught the unmistakable glint of hostility in its optical senses. The hegemony had not appreciated humanity's rapid rise in galactic politics. As they approached the main council chamber, Elena was struck by the sheer scale of the room. The chamber was designed to accommodate the council's founding species in their natural forms. Beings that ranged from the delicate Vorthans to the massive Titanians, whose representatives required specially reinforced platforms. The human delegations section looked tiny in comparison, but Elena noticed something that hadn't been there before. Dozens of smaller species had requested seating near the human delegation. Fleet Singer Lyrelai waved a graceful greeting from the Vorthan section. In the months since the crisis, her people had become humanity's strongest advocates, and their influence in council politics was considerable despite their physical fragility. The Vorthan cultural archives that they had refused to abandon had turned out to contain 3,000 years of detailed observations about galactic civilization. Observations that painted an unflattering picture of how the strong had systematically exploited the weak. "Ambassador Vasquez," a familiar voice called out. Elena turned to see Elder Valdris approaching, his ancient features showing what might have been amusement. "Are you prepared for today's session?" "As prepared as anyone can be for potentially starting a galactic civil war," Elena replied dryly. "Ah, but that is precisely why this is so important," Valdris said. "For too long we have avoided necessary conflicts in the name of stability. The result has been a stability built on injustice. The session bells chimed, and delegates began taking their positions. Elena noticed that the chamber was more crowded than usual. Word had spread throughout the galaxy about today's agenda. The formal vote on the Terran proposal, as it had come to be known, would determine not just humanity's role in galactic civilization, but whether the galaxy would continue on its current path or embrace something radically different. Council Speaker Morvandus called the session to order, his booming voice filling the vast chamber. The ancient Titanium's massive form dominated the central platform, his crystalline hide reflecting the chamber's lights in patterns that spoke of deep thought. We gather today to consider Resolution 2847, Alpha, the Terran Proposal for Reformed Galactic Governance. A murmur ran through the chamber. The formal title made it sound bureaucratic, but everyone present knew they were debating the future of galactic civilization itself. The Council recognizes Ambassador Elena Vasquez of the Terran Federation to present the proposal. Elena stood and walked to the central speaking platform, acutely aware that she was representing not just humanity, but every species in the galaxy that had ever felt powerless in the face of institutionalized injustice. The platform raised her to a height where she could address the entire chamber, and she looked out at representatives of hundreds of species. Honorable delegates, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. 6 months ago, humanity witnessed what we believe represents a fundamental flaw in our current system of galactic governance. A powerful species used legal technicalities to justify what was essentially attempted genocide against a peaceful people. When we intervened to prevent this atrocity, we were told we were violating galactic law. She paused, letting that sink in.
This suggests that our laws have become more important than our justice, that our procedures have become more sacred than our principles.
The human speaks of justice, interrupted Hegemon Prime Zek. 9, the Hegemon's chief representative. But justice is subjective, law is objective. Without law, we have only chaos. Elena had expected this challenge. Hegemon Prime, with respect. Law without justice is not order. It's tyranny. When powerful species can manipulate legal technicalities to prey upon the weak, when bureaucratic procedures become more important than preventing suffering, then we have built a system that serves power instead of serving sentient beings. And what does humanity propose instead? Asked Chancellor Vexhai of the corporate consortium, her reptilian features betraying nothing of her thoughts. Anarchy, vigilante justice? We propose accountability, Elena replied firmly. We propose that the Galactic Council adopt 3 fundamental principles that will govern how we interpret and apply galactic law. She activated the holographic display at the center of the platform. First, the principle of sentient dignity. All sentient beings have inherent worth that supersedes political convenience, economic advantage, or legal technicalities. A display showed footage from the Vorthan crisis. Refugee ships filled with families, their bioluminescent patterns speaking of fear and hope in equal measure. Second, the principle of protective responsibility. Those with power have an obligation to use that power to protect the vulnerable, not to exploit them. The display shifted to show the new Geneva positioning herself between the Carathian dreadnoughts and the Vorthan transports, a single ship defying impossible odds. Third, the principle of active justice. When systems fail to protect the innocent, when laws become tools of oppression rather than liberation, then moral beings have not just the right but the duty to act according to conscience rather than convenience. Elena could see the chamber dividing along predictable lines. The newer species, the smaller civilizations, the peoples who had suffered under the current system, they were leaning forward, hope bright in their varied features. The older powers, the species who had shaped galactic law to their advantage, they sat back, their expressions ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. The human proposal sounds admirable in theory, said Archon Thel of the Eternal Republic, his ancient voice carrying the weight of 5,000 years of political experience. But in practice, it would be catastrophic. Who decides what constitutes justice? Who determines when intervention is necessary? These principles would give every species carte blanche to interfere in the affairs of others. Elena had anticipated this argument as well. Archon Thel, you raise important concerns. That's why the Terran proposal includes specific mechanisms for implementation. The holographic display shifted to show a complex organizational chart. We propose the creation of the Galactic Justice Tribunal, with representatives selected not by political appointment, but by demonstrated commitment to the protection of sentient rights. This tribunal would have the authority to investigate complaints, mediate disputes, and when necessary authorize intervention to prevent atrocities. And who would serve on this tribunal? Asked Valdris, though Elena suspected he already knew the answer. Representatives from species who have proven their commitment to justice over self-interest, Elena replied. The Vorthans who chose preservation of cultural heritage over military power. The Zulrani who have maintained neutrality and wisdom for millennia. The Peaceful Collective who have never initiated aggressive action despite having the military capacity to dominate their entire sector. She paused, then continued. And yes, humanity would accept a position on the tribunal, not because we claim to be perfect, but because we have demonstrated our willingness to sacrifice for principles rather than profit. Admiral Thrakus chose that moment to request recognition. The Carathian's scaled features were twisted with rage, and when he spoke, his voice carried the grinding sound of tectonic plates shifting. The Carathian Empire will never accept this human arrogance. You speak of justice and protection, but what you propose is the domination of galactic civilization by species too weak to achieve power through legitimate means. Elena felt anger rising in her chest, but she forced herself to respond calmly. Admiral, the Carathian Empire has achieved remarkable things through strength and determination. But strength without wisdom, power without compassion, these things do not create civilization. They create tyranny. You dare lecture the Carathians on tyranny? Thrakus roared, his massive frame rising from the delegation platform. Your species has existed in space for barely 2 centuries. You know nothing of the burdens of maintaining galactic order. We know enough to recognize when order has become oppression. Elena shot back, her diplomatic training finally giving way to the fire that had driven her into this career. We know enough to see that your galactic order only serves those strong enough to enforce it. The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates began arguing among themselves, their various forms of communication, creating a cacophony that threatened to overwhelm the chamber's translation systems. Some species were clearly supporting Elena's position, while others rallied behind Thrakus. Council Speaker Morvandus brought his massive crystalline fist down on the control platform with a sound like breaking mountains. Order! The chamber will maintain order. As the noise subsided, Elena realized that something significant had just happened. The careful politeness that usually characterized council sessions had shattered, revealing the deep divisions that had been hidden beneath diplomatic courtesy for generations. The human has revealed her true nature, Thrakus said, his voice now controlled but still carrying undertones of menace. Beneath the pretty words about justice and protection lies the same hunger for power that drives all expanding species. They seek to remake galactic civilization in their image. No, said a new voice, clear and melodious in the sudden silence. Fleet singer Lyrelay had requested recognition and now stood in the Vorthan section. Admiral Thrakus speaks of human hunger for power, but I have seen human actions. When my people faced extinction, when 60,000 Vorthans prepared to die in the darkness between stars, 17 species received our distress calls. 17 species calculated costs and benefits and chose neutrality. Her bioluminescent patterns shifted to frequencies that Elena's cultural database tagged as expressions of profound emotion. Only humanity chose to act. Only humanity placed their ship between predators and prey. They had everything to lose and nothing to gain, yet they chose justice over safety. Pretty words, growled Thrakus, but actions speak louder than rhetoric. If the humans truly believe in these principles, let them prove it. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She recognized the tone in Thrakus's voice, the sound of a predator about to spring a trap. Admiral, she said carefully, what exactly are you proposing? Thrakus's features twisted into what passed for a smile among his species. A test, Ambassador. Your species claims to stand for protection of the weak, for intervention against injustice. Very well. There is currently a situation that fits your criteria perfectly. The holographic display at the center of the chamber shifted, showing star charts of the Outer Rim territories. The Devourers have returned, Ambassador. They are currently attacking the Keth mining colonies in the 7th sector. 17 worlds, 40 million beings, facing complete extermination. Elena's blood turned to ice. The Devourers were a nightmare from galactic history. A species of biomechanical entities that consumed entire ecosystems, leaving dead worlds behind them. They had vanished into the galactic dark centuries ago, and most beings had hoped they were extinct. If humanity truly stands for protection of the innocent, Thrakus continued, then here is your opportunity to prove it. The Kaith are a client species of the Carathian Empire, but we are otherwise occupied with border disputes in the core. Perhaps the great human protectors would like to volunteer for this mission. The chamber fell completely silent. Elena could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her, could sense the trap that Thrakus had laid with predatory cunning. If humanity refused, they would be exposed as hypocrites who only acted when the risks were manageable. If they accepted, they would be sending human forces against an enemy that had defeated entire galactic fleets in the past. The Devourers, Elena said slowly, are considered a galactic-level threat. No single species has ever successfully fought them alone. Precisely, Thrakus replied with satisfaction, which is why this would be an excellent test of human principles. Unless, of course, your fine words about justice and protection only apply when the enemy can be easily defeated. Elena looked around the chamber, seeing the expressions of the various delegates. Some looked hopeful, believing that humanity would somehow find a way to save the Keth. Others looked skeptical, certain that this challenge would expose human limitations. But most looked simply curious, waiting to see whether humanity's actions would match their rhetoric. "Admiral," Elena said finally, "if humanity were to undertake this mission, what support could we expect from the Galactic Council?" "The same support the Vorthans received," Thrakus replied smoothly. "Emergency resolutions, formal protests, and precisely nothing of material value." Elena felt Captain Rodriguez's hand touch her shoulder lightly, a signal they had developed during their years of working together. She glanced back at him and saw him nod slightly. He was telling her that whatever decision she made, the human military would support it. Elena thought of all the reasons to refuse. The Devourers were a threat beyond current human capabilities. The mission would likely result in massive casualties, possibly the destruction of entire human fleets. The logical choice was to decline gracefully and focus on building alliances through less risky means. Then she thought of Fleet Singer Lyra Lay's voice on that terrible day. "We do not ask you to fight for us. Perhaps you could carry word of our fate to those who remember us with kindness." She thought of 40 million Keth, facing the same terror, the same hopeless certainty of death. "Admiral Thrakus," Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber. "The Terran Federation accepts your challenge. We will organize a relief expedition to the 7th sector." The silence that followed was so complete that Elena could hear her own heartbeat. Then, slowly, delegates began to react. Some with admiration, others with disbelief, and a few with what looked suspiciously like terror at the implications of humanity's decision. However, Elena continued, raising her voice, "We will not go alone. This chamber has heard our proposal for reformed galactic governance based on principles of justice and protection. Here is our opportunity to put those principles into practice." She turned to address the entire chamber. "We call upon every species that believes in the protection of the innocent, every civilization that values justice over convenience, every people who remember what it means to stand together against the dark, join us. Help us prove that galactic civilization can be more than a collection of competing interests. Help us show that when the galaxy faces existential threats, we face them together." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Fleet Singer Lyra Lay was the first to stand. "The Vorthan peoples stand with humanity."
Elder Valdris rose slowly from the Zelrani section.
"The Zelrani Diplomatic Corps will provide support and counsel." One by one, delegates from smaller species began to stand. The Peaceful Collective, the Reformed Hegemony, the Free Traders Alliance. Dozens of civilizations that had long felt powerless in galactic politics suddenly found their voice. But Elena noticed that the older powers remained seated. The Corporate Consortium, the Eternal Republic, the Core Worlds Alliance. They watched the proceedings with expressions that ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. Admiral Thrakus stood slowly, his massive frame dominating the Carathian section. "How touching," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "A coalition of the weak and idealistic, marching off to certain doom. The Carathian Empire wishes you luck, humans. You will need it." Elena looked at him steadily. "Admiral, I notice you haven't offered to join our coalition. Does the mighty Carathian Empire not believe in protecting the innocent?" "The Carathian Empire believes in results, not gestures," Thrakus replied. "When your noble fleet is scattered to atoms by devourer weapons, remember that you chose this path." "We will," Elena said simply. "And if we fall, others will take our place. That's what civilization means, Admiral. That's what separates sentient beings from predators." As the session ended and delegates began filing out, Elena felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Humanity had just committed to the most dangerous mission in their brief spacefaring history. But they hadn't committed alone. Captain Rodriguez appeared at her side as they walked through the corridors. Elena, do you realize what we just did? We put our money where our mouth is, Elena replied. The question now is whether we're strong enough to back up our principles with action. The fleet's been running simulations ever since we heard about the Devourers, Rodriguez said quietly. It's not going to be easy. They're unlike anything we've ever faced. Elena nodded, thinking of the reports she had read about Devourer attacks. Entire fleets had vanished without a trace, their only legacy the dead worlds left behind. But she also thought of the coalition that had formed in the chamber, of species that had found hope in humanity's stubborn refusal to calculate acceptable losses. Maria, she said, I think we're about to find out what humanity is really capable of when we're not fighting alone. Behind them, in the Great Council chamber, the foundations of galactic civilization continued their ancient work of bearing the weight of history. But those foundations had just been tested in a way they hadn't experienced for millennia, and the cracks were starting to show. The galaxy was about to discover whether its future lay with those who calculated costs, or those who counted lives. And at the center of that discovery, a species barely 2 centuries old was about to prove that sometimes the newest voices carried the oldest truths. The expedition to the 7th sector would test more than human capabilities. It would test the very idea that morality could triumph over pragmatism, that justice could overcome power, and that in the vast darkness of space, someone would always be willing to light a candle for those who could not light their own. The coalition fleet that assembled at Rally Point Defiance was unlike anything the galaxy had seen in recorded history. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the human flagship Indomitable, watching as ships from 47 different species took formation in the void. The sight should have been inspiring, but Chen couldn't shake the feeling that she was leading a funeral procession. Final count shows 837 vessels, reported Commander Liu from the tactical station, ranging from Vorthan hospital ships to that Titanian dreadnought that's bigger than our space stations. Chen nodded grimly. On paper, it was an impressive force. In practice, it was a logistical nightmare held together by good intentions and desperate hope. Most of these species had never fought alongside each other, their technologies were incompatible, and their tactical doctrines had evolved for entirely different kinds of warfare. Any word from the advanced scouts? Chen asked. Just came in, Admiral, Lear replied, his face pale. The Keth homeworld of Kepler Prime, it's gone. The bridge fell silent. Chen felt her stomach drop. Gone how? Completely strip-mined. The Devourers consumed the entire planetary biosphere in 72 hours. According to the probe data, there's nothing left but bare rock and toxic atmosphere. Chen closed her eyes briefly. Kepler Prime had been home to 12 million Keth. The mining families, the cultural centers, the vast crystal gardens that the Keth had tended for millennia. All of it reduced to nothing in less than 3 days. How many other worlds? She asked quietly. 14 confirmed lost, Liu reported. 3 more under active attack. The Devourers are moving through the 7th sector like a plague. Admiral, came a voice from the communications station. Fleet Singer Lyra Lee is requesting conference with all coalition commanders. Chen straightened her uniform. Patch her through to the main holographic display. The bridge filled with the ghostly images of allied commanders from across the fleet. Admiral Chen had met most of them during the frantic planning sessions at Rally Point Defiance, but seeing them all together still struck her as surreal. Captain Zexay of the Hegemony Rebels, his mechanical form gleaming with non-standard modifications. Elder Morvac of the Peaceful Collective, whose species had sworn off violence for 3,000 years until this moment. Commander Thessa of the Free Traders, whose merchant background showed in every practical detail of her approach to warfare. But it was Fleet Singer Lyra Lay who commanded attention when she spoke. The Vorthan's bioluminescent patterns had shifted to frequencies that even the humans could recognize as determination mixed with sorrow. Honored allies, Lyra Lay began, her musical voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. Our advanced scouts have confirmed what we feared. The Devourers have evolved since their last appearance in our galaxy. Their consumption rate has increased dramatically, and their defensive capabilities have grown beyond all previous estimations. A tactical display materialized showing the Devourer fleet structure. The biomechanical vessels looked like infections in space, angular forms that seemed to shift and flow even while maintaining their basic configuration. But the numbers were what made Chen's blood run cold. Intelligence estimates put their fleet strength at over 2,000 vessels, Lyra Lay continued. Each ship appears to be both a weapon of war and a harvesting platform capable of consuming planetary matter at rates that exceed our theoretical models. Fleet Singer, interrupted Captain Zexhai, his mechanical voice carrying overtones of calculation. Given these parameters, the logical recommendation is immediate withdrawal. Coalition forces are outnumbered better than 2-1 by an enemy of unknown technological capabilities. The hegemony unit speaks truth, agreed Elder Morvac, though his usually peaceful demeanor showed strain. To proceed would be to sacrifice our entire force for minimal strategic gain. Chen felt the mood of the conference shifting. The Allied commanders had volunteered for this mission knowing it would be dangerous, but the reality of facing the Devourers was testing even the most determined spirits. Commanders, Chen said, stepping forward in the holographic array, I understand the concerns. The tactical situation is worse than our worst-case scenarios. But I need to ask you something. What happens if we turn back now? We preserve our forces for more winnable engagements, Captain Zexike replied immediately. No, Chen said firmly. What happens to the Keith still fighting for their lives on those 3 worlds? What happens to every other species in the Outer Rim when the Devourers finish with the 7th sector and start looking for new feeding grounds? She activated her own tactical display, showing projected Devourer expansion patterns. Our xenobiologists estimate that at their current consumption rate, the Devourers could strip mine 50 worlds a year. By the time they reach the core systems, they'll have consumed half the galaxy's inhabited planets. The human admiral speaks of distant possibilities, said Commander Tessa pragmatically. The immediate possibility is the destruction of our entire fleet. Then we make sure our destruction means something, Chen replied. Fleet Singer Lyreli, what's the status of evacuation efforts on the remaining Keth worlds? Lyreli's patterns shifted to what Chen had learned indicated deep sadness. The Keth are refusing to abandon their remaining colonies. Their cultural imperatives require them to defend their ancestral mining sites, even if defense means certain death. Then we give them a chance to defend them, Chen said simply. The conference fell silent. Chen could see the internal struggle on the faces of her allies, the conflict between military logic and moral imperative that had brought them all to this point. Admiral Chen, Elder Morvac said slowly, if we proceed with this mission, it is unlikely any of us will survive to return home. Are you asking us to sacrifice our lives for strangers? Chen thought of Ambassador Vasquez's words in the council chambers, of the promise humanity had made to stand with those who stood with them. Elder, I'm asking you to remember why we're here. 6 months ago, the galaxy watched as my species put one ship between 5 enemy dreadnoughts to save 60,000 Vorthans. We didn't calculate odds. We didn't weigh costs and benefits. We saw suffering and acted to stop it. She looked around at the assembled commanders. That action started something. It proved that galactic civilization could be more than a collection of competing interests. It showed that when we stand together, when we choose justice over convenience, we become something greater than the sum of our parts. But at what cost? Commander Thessa asked. Even if we somehow defeat the Devourers, the casualties will be catastrophic. Entire species represented here could be wiped out. Yes, Chen admitted. The cost will be terrible. But the cost of doing nothing will be worse. Because if we turn back now, if we abandon the Keth to their fate, then we prove that all our fine words about justice and protection were just rhetoric. We prove that when it really matters, we're no different from the powers we claim to oppose. Fleet Singer Lyrelay's patterns suddenly shifted to frequencies that the translation system identified as hope. Admiral Chen speaks truth that echoes in the deep places of the heart. My people know the value of standing against the dark, even when standing means falling. Captain Zaxe's optical sensors focused on Chen with mechanical precision. The human commander proposes certain destruction for uncertain gains. However, data indicates that retreat would only delay inevitable confrontation with Devourer forces. If engagement is inevitable, current tactical position may offer optimal circumstances, despite numerical disadvantage. Chen felt a surge of hope. If even the pragmatic hegemony rebels were willing to fight, perhaps they had a chance after all. Elder Morvac? Chen asked. The ancient being who had sworn to peace for millennia straightened his ethereal form. The peaceful collective has maintained neutrality for 3,000 years, but neutrality in the face of genocide is complicity. We stand with the coalition. One by one, the other commanders voiced their agreement. Some reluctantly, others with grim determination, but all of them choosing to stay and fight despite the odds. Then we proceed, Chen said. But we don't proceed blindly. I have a plan. The tactical display shifted, showing the 7th sector in detail. The Devourers operate like a swarm, individual units with limited intelligence following simple directives from centralized command nodes. Our intelligence suggests that they've established 3 primary harvest coordinators in the sector, massive vessels that direct the smaller units. You propose targeting their command structure, observed Captain Zexei. Logical that these command nodes will be heavily defended. That's where our diversity becomes an advantage, Chen replied. The Devourers have evolved to fight conventional galactic fleet tactics. They've never faced a coalition like ours, with technologies and strategies from dozens of different evolutionary paths.
She highlighted different portions of the plan.
The Vorthan hospital ships and their medical nanites could potentially disrupt Devourer biomechanical systems. The Hegemony's quantum torpedoes might penetrate their adaptive shielding. The Titanian Dreadnought's gravitic weapons could create space-time distortions that interfere with their swarm coordination. And human forces? Asked Fleet Singer Lyrelay. Chen's expression hardened. Human forces will do what we do best. We'll buy time for everyone else to work. We'll take the hits, absorb the damage, and keep fighting long enough for the specialized attacks to succeed. The implications of that statement hung in the air. Human ships would serve as the anvil against which the Devourers would strike, bearing the brunt of enemy fire while their allies maneuvered into position. Admiral, Commander Thessa said quietly, that's essentially asking human forces to commit suicide. Yes, Chen agreed. It is. But that's what humans do when people need protecting. We stand in the gap, we take the hits, and we buy time for others to survive. The conference chamber fell silent except for the quiet hum of life support systems across the fleet. Chen could sense the weight of decision settling on her allies' shoulders, the realization of what they were committing to. There's something else, Chen continued. Something I need all of you to understand. If we lose this battle, if the Devourers destroy our fleet, the galaxy will remember. They'll remember that when extinction came calling, 47 species stood together and said no. They'll remember that we chose to fight for strangers rather than calculate acceptable losses. She paused, looking each commander in the eye. And maybe when the next crisis comes, more species will remember that example. Maybe next time, it won't be 47 ships against 2,000. Maybe it'll be 470. Fleet Singer Lyrelay's bioluminescent patterns shifted to what Chen recognized as profound emotion. The Admiral speaks of legacy. This is wisdom the Vorthans understand deeply. We have always believed that how we face the dark matters more than whether we survive it. Then we're agreed, Chen said. We proceed with Operation Last Light. All fleet commanders prepare your vessels for immediate departure to the Keth home system of New Kepler. As the conference ended and the holographic images faded, Chen found herself alone on the bridge with her human crew. They looked at her with expressions she had seen before. The quiet resolve of people who knew they were probably going to die but had chosen their path anyway.
Admiral, Commander Liu said quietly, the crew understands what we're facing.
They wanted me to tell you that they're proud to serve under your command. Chen nodded, her throat suddenly tight. Tell them the feeling is mutual. She looked out at the coalition fleet through the bridge viewports, at ships from species that had found courage they didn't know they possessed. Tomorrow, many of those vessels would be debris scattered across the cosmos. But tonight, they represented something that the galaxy had forgotten existed. The power of beings who chose to stand together against the dark. All ships! Chen broadcast to the fleet. This is Admiral Chen. We are the coalition of the willing, the defenders of the defenseless, the voice of those who cannot speak for themselves. We go now to face an enemy that has consumed worlds, that has brought extinction to entire civilizations. We do not go with certainty of victory, we go with certainty of purpose. She paused, watching as the first ships began moving toward the hyperspace jump coordinates. Remember this moment, she continued. Remember that when the galaxy faced its darkest hour, you chose to be the light. Remember that when evil seemed unstoppable, you chose to stand and fight. And remember that no matter what happens in the hours to come, you proved that galactic civilization can be more than law and order and calculated advantage. You proved it can be noble. The fleet jumped to hyperspace in perfect formation, 837 ships carrying the hopes of every species that had ever dreamed of justice in a universe that too often seemed indifferent to suffering. Behind them, at Rally Point Defiance, automated beacons began broadcasting a message to the galaxy. Coalition fleet departed for 7th Sector at 13:47 hours, Galactic Standard Time. Mission parameters: protection of civilian populations from Devourer assault. Fleet Commander, Admiral Sarah Chen, Terran Federation. Coalition motto: we stand with them. The message would reach every corner of galactic civilization within days, carrying news of the most desperate military operation in recorded history. Some who heard it would call the coalition heroes. Others would call them fools. But in refugee camps and hidden colonies throughout the galaxy, beings who had lived in fear would hear the message and whisper the same words that had echoed across the void 6 months earlier. The humans are coming, and they're not coming alone. The Battle of New Kepler was about to begin, and with it, the final test of whether humanity's promise to stand with the innocent was more than just words in the dark. The Coalition fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the New Kepler system to find hell waiting for them. Admiral Chen gripped her command chair as the tactical display populated with hostile contacts. Over 3,000 Devourer vessels swarming around the dying world like metallic locusts. The planet itself was barely recognizable, its surface covered with the geometric scars of massive mining operations that consumed everything in their path. "Jesus Christ," whispered Commander Liu. Intelligence underestimated their numbers by 50%. Chen studied the tactical display with grim determination. The Devourer fleet was arranged in loose formations around 3 massive command vessels that dwarfed even the Titanian dreadnought. Each command node was easily the size of a space station, its biomechanical hull pulsing with energy that seemed to coordinate the movements of hundreds of smaller vessels. "Fleet status report," Chen ordered. "All Coalition ships have successfully translated," reported Lieutenant Yamamoto from Communications. Fleet Singer Lyrelay reports Vorthan medical ships are ready to deploy nanite payloads. Captain Zexai confirms hegemony quantum torpedoes are armed and ready. The Titanian Dreadnought World Render signals ready to engage. Chen activated the Fleet Communications Array. "All units, this is Admiral Chen. The enemy force is larger than anticipated, but our mission remains unchanged. We protect the survivors on New Kepler, and we show these creatures that some prey fights back." She paused, looking out at the swarm of hostile vessels that blocked their path to the planet. "Operation Last Light is now in effect. Human vessels, take point formation. All Allied ships execute specialized attack patterns as briefed. Remember, we may not all make it home, but every Devourer we destroy here is one that won't threaten someone else's family." The Coalition fleet began its attack run, human ships forming the spearhead while their allies maneuvered into support positions. The sight would have been magnificent under other circumstances. Vessels from dozens of different species working in perfect coordination, their various technologies creating a light show that turned the darkness of space into something approaching beauty. Then the Devourers responded. The enemy swarm moved with inhuman precision, thousands of vessels adjusting course simultaneously as the central command nodes coordinated their response. Chen watched in fascination and growing horror as the Devourer fleet formation shifted like living organisms, adapting to the Coalition's approach with predatory intelligence. "Incoming fire!" Liu called out. "All ships evasive action." The space between the fleets erupted in destruction. Devourer weapons were unlike anything in the galactic databases. Beams of energy that seemed to disintegrate matter at the molecular level, projectiles that phased through conventional shields as if they weren't there, and most terrifying of all, boarding pods that latched onto ship hulls and began converting the vessels themselves into more Devourer units. The human frigate Courageous was the first casualty, her hull compromised by boarding pods that spread across her surface like a metallic virus. Captain Martinez's final transmission was brief and professional. "This is Courageous. Conversion pods have breached our hull, initiating self-destruct to prevent capture. Tell my family I..." The transmission cut off as the frigate erupted in brilliant nuclear fire, taking a dozen Devourer vessels with her in the explosion. "Admiral!" Liu's voice carried strain but not panic. "The enemy is focusing fire on human vessels. They're targeting our ships specifically." Chen felt a cold smile cross her face. "Good. That means the plan is working. All human vessels, maintain position. Draw as much fire as possible. Allied ships, begin your approach runs." The next 20 minutes were the longest of Chen's life. Human ship after human ship fell to overwhelming Devourer firepower there,